When my mother stood before 500 people at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado and announced that at least James was serving for real, not just pushing paper in some air-conditioned office, I didn't argue. I sat perfectly still in that metal folding chair, third row from the front, and took a sip of Aquafina from the bottle in my purse. The water was lukewarm, slightly metallic. I thought about the $180,000 deposited into my Navy Federal Credit Union account each year. I thought about the penthouse in Honolulu's Waia Tower, 36 floors above the Pacific, $2.3 million of floor-to-ceiling glass and teak that my parents had never been invited to see. I thought about the Bronze Star for Meritorious Service locked in a safe deposit box because the operation it recognized was still classified, even 7 years later. I thought about the Navy Distinguished Service Medal sitting beside it, earned during 72 hours without sleep coordinating a carrier strike group through a crisis that could have escalated into armed conflict. But in approximately 10 minutes, Lieutenant General Robert Hayes would step down from that podium, walk directly toward me through a crowd that included my parents, and render a salute that would force every officer on this base to stand at attention. He would announce my rank over the loudspeaker system. He would tell 500 strangers that their beloved SEAL ceremony was being honored by the presence of Rear Admiral Catherine Morrison, commander of Pacific Fleet Logistics and Operations Group, responsible for keeping 47,000 sailors supplied across 13 time zones. My parents were about to discover that the daughter they'd overlooked for 3 decades wasn't pushing paper. She was moving mountains. I'm Rear Admiral Catherine Morrison, 48 years old, one of the youngest flag officers in the United States Navy. I built this career from absolute zero, from a childhood bedroom with faded rose wallpaper and participation trophies for sports I was never good at, from a family that decided before I hit puberty that I would always matter less than my younger brother. For 26 years, I showed up for them anyway. I funded trips home between deployments. I called from aircraft carriers in the Arabian Gulf. I stood quietly at every graduation, every wedding, every milestone, while they celebrated James like he'd invented success. But silence isn't weakness. Silence is a choice. Silence, I learned across 3 decades of being invisible, is strength dressed in patience. The question I want you to consider, wherever you're watching this from, is simple. Have you ever been so thoroughly dismissed by your own family that they don't know where you live, what you earn, what you've accomplished? If the answer is yes, then stay with me. Because what happens next will show you why sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the truth reveal itself. The morning before the ceremony, I'd flown in from Honolulu on a military transport. I could have taken commercial, but a C-130 was heading to North Island anyway, carrying supply manifests I'd approved the week before. I sat in the jump seat surrounded by cargo netting and the smell of hydraulic fluid, reading incident reports on a tablet, while the loadmaster pretended not to recognize the stars on my shoulder boards. I landed at 0600, picked up a rental BMW 540i from the Avis lot on base because my personal vehicle was still in Hawaii, checked into the Navy Lodge, a bland 2-story building that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and offered a view of the parking lot. I didn't need luxury for one night. I had luxury waiting for me at home, in a residence my parents would never have guessed I could afford. The dinner was worse than I'd anticipated. My parents lived in Oceanside now, 20 minutes north of the base in a modest 3-bedroom ranch they'd bought in 1998. The house had good bones but showed its age, a roof that needed replacing, a driveway with cracks spreading like spider webs, landscaping that consisted mostly of drought-tolerant succulents because Southern California water was expensive. I pulled up at 18:30 hours. The sun was setting orange over the Pacific, visible between 2 houses across the street. James's truck was already there, a Ford F-150 he'd bought used before SEAL selection, still wearing Pendleton Marine Base stickers on the bumper. My mother answered the door in a navy dress she'd clearly bought for tomorrow's ceremony. Her hair was freshly colored, the gray covered with something close to her original auburn. She kissed my cheek with the distracted affection of someone whose mind was already 3 steps ahead. The house smelled like pot roast and carrots. My father sat in his recliner watching the Padres lose to the Dodgers, a beer-sweating condensation onto a coaster. James stood in the kitchen doorway in jeans and a Coronado running shirt, his hair military short, his face leaner than I remembered. Buds did that, stripped everything soft away until only muscle and determination remained. We sat down to eat at 1900 hours. My mother served pot roast like it was a sacred ritual. The largest portion went to James. My father poured wine from a bottle of middling Cabernet, filling James's glass to the rim, mine to barely an inch. The meal felt choreographed, a performance we'd all given hundreds of times. My father leaned forward, wearing the expression he reserved for moments when he was genuinely proud. His voice carried that particular warmth that used to make me try harder, do better, achieve more. "How's the training going?" James shrugged, but he was smiling. The kind of smile that said he knew the answer would please everyone at the table. "Tough, really tough. But I'm loving it. Buds is no joke." My mother beamed. Her whole face transformed, the way it always did when James exceeded expectations, which was constantly. "Of course it isn't. You're going to be a SEAL, a real hero." I cut into my pot roast. It was overcooked, the meat stringy and dry. I chewed slowly, methodically, the way I'd learned to chew through every disappointment this family had served me. My father turned toward me, almost as an afterthought. His eyes had already started drifting back toward James even as he formed the question. "And you, Catherine? Still doing the, what is it you do again, operations coordination?" I set my fork down carefully, aligned it precisely with the edge of my plate. "Logistics and strategic planning. I manage supply chain operations for Pacific Fleet." He nodded, but his attention was slipping. I could see it in the way his gaze moved past me, toward the window, toward anything that wasn't my face. "That's good. Important work, I'm sure." My mother set down her fork with more force than necessary. The metal clinked against the ceramic plate, a sharp sound that made James flinch slightly. "At least James is serving for real. Out there in the field, actually doing something." The words hung in the air like smoke. I watched them settle, watched James's eyes widen just slightly, watched my father nod in agreement before he'd even processed what she'd said. I could have corrected them, could have explained that logistics and strategic planning meant I was responsible for ensuring that every SEAL team, every carrier strike group, every submarine, every surface vessel in the Pacific had the fuel, ammunition, food, parts, and equipment they needed to complete their missions. That without logistics, there were no operations, no heroes, no wars won or prevented. That my decisions affected billions of dollars in assets and tens of thousands of lives. Instead, I took a sip of the wine my father had barely poured. It was acidic, cheap. I swallowed and said nothing. This was how it had always been. James was the golden child, charming, athletic, the one who made everything look effortless. I was the quiet one, the one who studied too much, who didn't quite fit the narrative my parents had written before I turned 10. I grew up invisible, not neglected, not abused, just unseen in the specific way that happens when a family has already decided who matters most. James was 3 years younger than me, born after our parents had spent my early childhood hoping for a son. When he finally arrived, their world reoriented around him like planets around the sun. I was 3 when he was born. I remember the hospital visit vaguely, the way everyone fussed over the tiny red-faced baby in the bassinet. But what I remember most clearly, constructed from family photos and stories told over the years, is the shift in how my mother looked at him compared to how she'd looked at me. Softer, more complete. Like something had finally clicked into place. Dad had wanted a son to play catch with, to teach about cars and sports, to carry on the family name in the way that mattered to him. For those first 3 years, I tried to be that kid. But by the time James could throw a ball, I'd already been relegated to the sidelines. When I got into the Naval Academy, my mother said, "That's nice, honey." When James made varsity football, they drove 6 hours to watch him sit on the bench for 3 quarters. When I was commissioned as an ensign, they sent a card with a generic congratulations message and a $20 bill. When James got his first serious girlfriend, they threw a barbecue for 40 people. The pattern was old, worn smooth by repetition, familiar as a scar. "How long are you home for?" James was the one who asked. His voice carried genuine interest, which was more than I usually got. 3 days, then back to Pearl." My father shook his head, and I couldn't tell if he was impressed or dismissive. Hawaii must be nice. It's work. Sure, but it's not like you're in a combat zone or anything. Not like what this one's going to be doing. He gestured at James with his fork, a piece of carrot speared on the tines. James shifted in his seat, uncomfortable in a way that made me almost forgive him for being the favorite. Kate's job is important too, Dad. My mother jumped in quickly, her voice bright with false equivalence. Of course it is. We're proud of both of you. It's just, well, what James is doing is more visible, isn't it? More direct. I finished my pot roast, declined seconds even though I was still hungry. After dinner, I helped my mother with dishes while James and my father watched a basketball game in the living room. Their laughter drifted into the kitchen, easy and unforced, the sound of two people who understood each other perfectly. My mother handed me a plate to dry. The dish towel was damp, smelled faintly of mildew. You know we love you. I dried the plate carefully, set it in the cupboard. I know. It's just that James is doing something so extraordinary. She paused, waiting for me to agree, to absolve her of the comparison she was making. I understand. What I understood was this. My parents had decided long ago who I was and what I was worth. Nothing I did would change that narrative. Not my rank, not my service record, not the 26 years I'd spent commanding sailors and making decisions that kept them alive and operational across half the planet. To them, I would always be the daughter who didn't quite measure up to their son. I went to bed early that night in my childhood room. The rose wallpaper had faded to something closer to beige. The shelf still held those participation trophies: softball 7th place, track and field completion certificate, swimming honorable mention, relics of a girl who'd tried desperately to be seen. Through the wall, I heard James on the phone with his girlfriend. His voice was warm, relaxed. He laughed at something she said, and the sound carried a lightness I envied. I lay in the dark and thought about my command staff back in Hawaii. Commander Sandra Chen, my executive officer who told me last month that I was the best CO she'd ever served under. Captain Mike Rivera, my operations officer, who trusted my judgment on decisions involving hundreds of millions of dollars. The 2,300 men and women who reported up through my chain of command, who respected my leadership enough to follow orders that sometimes meant months away from their families. Then I thought about my mother saying, at least James is serving for real. The ceiling had a water stain in the corner shaped vaguely like a bird in flight. I'd spent countless nights in this room staring at that stain, wondering what was wrong with me, why I couldn't make my parents see me the way they saw James, why I was never enough. I didn't wonder anymore. I knew the answer. Nothing was wrong with me. The problem had never been mine to solve, but knowing that didn't make it hurt less. The next morning, my father mentioned over breakfast that James's seal ceremony was coming up in a few months. The statement landed casually, like he was mentioning the weather, but I saw my mother's eyes light up. You should come, if you can get leave. James actually looked at me when he said it, and I could tell he meant it. I'll try. It would mean a lot. James wasn't the problem. He never had been. He didn't ask to be the favorite, didn't encourage their blindness. If anything, he seemed embarrassed by it sometimes, though not enough to challenge them directly. The whole family will be there. It's going to be such a special day. My mother's voice carried that breathless quality she got when talking about James's accomplishments. I'm sure it will be. My father looked at me over his newspaper, and for a moment I thought he might actually ask about my life. My work. Anything. You could wear your uniform, dress it up a bit. I could. What I didn't say, I would be wearing my uniform. My service dress blues with the ribbons and insignia that told a story my parents had never bothered to read. The uniform of a Rear Admiral, '07, one of the youngest flag officers in the Navy. But they wouldn't see it. They never did. I finished my coffee and excused myself. I had a video conference with my staff in 2 hours and needed somewhere quiet with decent internet. I set up my laptop in the spare bedroom, logged into the secure network, and watched my screen fill with familiar faces. Good morning, Admiral. Commander Chen's voice was crisp, professional. She was in her office at Pearl, the morning sun from her window washing out part of the camera frame. Good morning. Let's get started. For 90 minutes, I was in my element. We discussed fleet readiness, personnel deployments, equipment maintenance schedules. A submarine tender in Guam had a part shortage that threatened to delay critical repairs. A supply ship in Yokosuka needed authorization to offload non-priority cargo to make room for an emergency medical supply run. A contracting dispute in San Diego was holding up a $50 million procurement. I made decisions, gave orders, solved problems. My staff listened, took notes, asked intelligent questions. When we finished, Chen said, "Thank you, ma'am. Enjoy the rest of your leave." I closed the laptop and sat in the silence of the spare bedroom. Downstairs, I could hear my parents laughing with James about something. The sound drifted up through the floorboards, warm and inclusive, a conversation I wasn't part of and never would be. I'd spent my entire career proving myself to people who took me seriously. Chiefs and captains, admirals and enlisted sailors. They saw my competence, respected my authority, trusted my leadership. But I'd never stopped trying to prove myself to the two people who refused to look. 3 days later, I flew back to Hawaii. My parents drove me to the airport in my father's aging Honda Accord. In the rearview mirror, I watched his eyes as he talked about James's training, about how proud they were, about how excited they were for the ceremony. My mother nodded along, adding details, asking me if I thought James would do well, if I was proud of him. I answered the questions, gave the responses they wanted, played my role in the family script. At the curb, they hugged me goodbye. My mother held on a moment longer than necessary. "We'll see you at James's ceremony, right?" "I'll be there," I promised. I would attend. Not as their daughter, not as James's older sister, but as myself. As Rear Admiral Catherine Morrison. And this time they would finally see me. The ceremony was scheduled for September 9th, 2023. I marked it in my calendar and began planning my travel. It would require 3 days of leave, which I had plenty of. I'd been working 70-hour weeks for months, burning through my time off allocation by simply not taking it. Commander Chen noticed when I put in the request. "Your brother's SEAL ceremony?" She was standing in my office doorway, holding a folder of personnel evaluations that needed my signature. We'd worked together for 18 months. She knew more about my family situation than most people, which meant she knew the basics and nothing deeper. "That's right. Big deal. My cousin went through BUDS, said it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. James earned it." She studied my face for a moment, reading something in my expression that I thought I'd kept neutral. "You okay, ma'am?" "I'm fine, just family dynamics." She nodded, understanding without needing details. Chen was 42, divorced, with 2 teenage daughters who lived with their father in Virginia. She understood complicated family relationships. "Well, if you need anything while you're gone, we've got it covered here." "I know you do." The months between that dinner and the ceremony passed in the usual rhythm. Meetings, decisions, problems that needed solving. A typhoon delayed equipment deliveries to Okinawa, requiring me to authorize alternative sourcing that cost an extra $200,000, but kept 3 ships operational. A personnel dispute between 2 commands threatened to derail a joint training exercise until I intervened personally. A congressional delegation visited Pearl Harbor and required a briefing on Pacific Fleet logistics capabilities, which meant 2 weeks of preparation for a 90-minute presentation. I led, I commanded. I built the career I'd started at 22, back when I was just Ensign Morrison, trying to prove that a woman who wasn't particularly athletic or charismatic could still earn respect through competence and dedication. My investment portfolio crossed $3 million in July. The penthouse had appreciated to $2.6 million since I'd purchased it 3 years earlier. My retirement account was fully funded. I had no debt beyond the mortgage, which I was paying down aggressively. I'd built financial security my parents couldn't imagine because they'd never asked. James called me twice during those months. The first time was in June, late at night, his voice tight with exhaustion. "Kate, you still up?" "Up." I was reading intelligence briefs on my tablet, sitting on the lanai with a glass of wine. The Honolulu skyline glittered below, lights reflecting off the dark water of Mamala Bay. "I am now. What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything." "I don't know." "BUDS is harder than I thought. Not physically, that part I can handle. But mentally, I'm fried. Everyone here is as good as me or better. I'm not special anymore." There was something raw in his voice, something that reminded me of my own plebe year at Annapolis. That realization that you're surrounded by people just as capable, just as driven. And the only thing separating success from failure is your willingness to endure. Where are you right now? Outside the barracks. I needed air. Go inside, find somewhere private. I'll wait. I heard him moving, heard a door close, heard the echo that meant he was in a bathroom or storage closet. Okay, I'm alone. Listen to me, James. What you're feeling is normal. Everyone in selection feels it. The whole point of buds is to push you past what you think you can handle. It's designed to make you doubt yourself. But what if I can't handle it? Then you can't. And that's not the end of the world. Silence on the other end. I could hear his breathing, ragged and uncertain. Being a SEAL isn't the only way to serve. It's not the only way to matter. If this isn't for you, that doesn't make you a failure. It makes you human. It makes me less than what I was supposed to be. And there it was. The weight of a lifetime of being the golden child. The one who was supposed to succeed at everything effortlessly. You were supposed to be perfect because mom and dad needed you to be. They put that on you the same way they ignored me. Neither of us asked for it. Neither of us deserved it. How did you do it? How did you keep going when nobody was watching? I thought about that question. About the nights in this same penthouse, sitting in this same spot, wondering if the career I'd built mattered if the people who raised me couldn't see it. I found purpose outside their approval. I served because I believed in it, not because anyone was clapping. I led sailors because they needed leadership, not because it would impress my parents. I built a life where my worth wasn't dependent on their recognition. I don't know if I can do that. You can. But first, you have to survive training. So here's what you're going to do tomorrow. You're going to see medical about that knee injury you mentioned. No pushing through pain, no being a hero. Get it treated properly. That'll put me behind. Better behind than broken. Then you're going to focus on one day at a time. Not the whole program. Not what happens after. Just the next day, the next evolution, the next challenge. Okay. And James, if you decide to quit, if you decide this isn't for you, that's okay too. I'll still be proud of you. His voice cracked when he answered. You're the only one who would be. Then I'm the only one whose opinion should matter. We talked for another 20 minutes. I gave him practical advice earned through my own years of pushing past limits. How to manage injuries without letting them sideline you permanently. How to deal with instructors who seem determined to break you. How to stay mentally strong when your body was failing. When we hung up, I sat on the lanai for another hour, thinking about my brother, the golden child who'd carried the weight of our parents' expectations his entire life, who'd never been allowed to be average or uncertain or afraid. Maybe we'd both been damaged, just in different ways. The second call came in August. His voice was different this time, lighter. Kate, I made it. I'm through Hell Week. I smiled into the phone, genuine pride warming my chest. I knew you would. I never doubted it. I did, a lot. That's what makes it real, James. Anyone who goes through that program and doesn't doubt themselves is either lying or not human. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you. For everything, I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have, but I'm glad I could help. After we hung up, Commander Chen found me in my office. It was late, nearly 2100 hours, but we were both still working. Good news? She'd read my expression, the rare smile I usually kept locked down. My brother made it through Hell Week. The SEAL? That's huge. You should be proud. I am. He worked hard for it. So did you, for your rank, I mean. She studied my face, and I wondered what she saw there. I've been thinking about what happened at your parents' house, what you told me about how they treat you versus your brother, and I realized something. What? You spent your whole career becoming someone worthy of respect, someone who earned everything she has, and you did it without recognition or support from the people who should have given it freely. That's more impressive than anything your brother accomplished. That's not a competition, Sandra. I know, but sometimes people need to hear that they're remarkable, even if it's not from the people they wanted to hear it from. She left before I could respond. That evening, I received an email from my mother. The subject line was James's ceremony details. Inside was information about the date, time, location. A note that they'd reserved a hotel room for me at the Navy Lodge if I wanted it. A P.S. asking if I'd like to stay with them instead, though the tone suggested she hoped I'd say no, so the guest room could be available for other relatives. I replied that I'd stay at the lodge, booked my room, arranged a military transport flight from Hickam to North Island, put in my leave request, which was approved within an hour. I didn't tell them I was coming as Rear Admiral Catherine Morrison. Didn't explain that my service dress blues would carry ribbons and insignia that told a story they'd spent 26 years refusing to read. I could have. Could have sent them my official bio, my promotion photos, my awards and decorations. Could have made them understand who I'd become while they were busy watching James. But silence, I'd learned, was more powerful than explanation. Sometimes the truth needed to reveal itself. September 9th arrived with clear skies and perfect California weather. I flew in the day before, checked into the lodge, reviewed my emails, and made a few calls to my staff in Hawaii. Everything was running smoothly. The Pacific Fleet logistics machine I'd built and maintained didn't need me to hold its hand for 3 days. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for a pre-ceremony dinner. James was there, looking leaner and harder than ever, his hair freshly cut, his bearing unmistakably military now. He hugged me when I arrived, and I felt the muscles in his back, solid and defined. "You look good." Buds will do that, strip everything unnecessary away. My parents fussed over him through dinner, asked about his training, his instructors, his class. They wanted to know everything, and he answered patiently, though I could see the exhaustion beneath his smile. They asked me nothing. At one point, my mother turned to me with an afterthought question. "You're still in Hawaii?" "Still at Pearl Harbor, yes." "That must be nice, all that sunshine." "It's work, Mom. 70-hour weeks managing logistics operations across 13 time zones." She nodded absently, already looking back at James. "Well, tomorrow's the big day. Our son, a Navy SEAL. Can you imagine?" I could imagine. I could also imagine a world where they'd shown 1/10 of this enthusiasm for my accomplishments, where they'd asked about my work with genuine curiosity instead of polite disinterest. But that world didn't exist, had never existed, and pretending otherwise was exhausting. I left early, claiming I needed rest before the ceremony. James walked me to my car. "Thanks for being here." I wouldn't miss it. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but the words didn't come. Instead, he hugged me again, tighter this time. "I know things are weird with Mom and Dad. I'm sorry." "You have nothing to apologize for." I drove back to the lodge through the warm California night, past strip malls and gas stations, and the ordinary machinery of civilian life. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, my parents would finally see me. But tonight, I was still invisible, and I'd spent 30 years learning how to be comfortable in that silence. The ceremony began at 10:00 hours sharp. I arrived 40 minutes early, parking the BMW in a spot near the main gate where I could walk to the seating area without attracting attention. The morning air carried that distinctive Southern California coastal smell: salt water, kelp, diesel fuel from the boats moored nearby. 76 degrees, not a cloud visible, the kind of weather that made tourists think paradise was a permanent condition. I wore my service dress blues. The jacket fit perfectly, tailored last month in Honolulu by a seamstress who specialized in military uniforms. The gold stripe on my sleeve caught sunlight as I locked the car. The shoulder boards bore the single silver star of a Rear Admiral, lower half, '07, flag rank, insignia that should have been impossible to miss. But nobody looked. The parking lot was chaos, families clustered around trucks and SUVs, pulling out cameras, adjusting clothing, clutching programs printed on glossy paper. A banner stretched across the main gate. "Congratulations, SEALs Class 350. Children ran between cars, excited by the spectacle they didn't fully understand. Parents corralled them, voices sharp with the particular stress that comes before important ceremonies. I walked through the crowd like a ghost. People moved aside without seeing me, their eyes already focused on the rows of metal chairs facing the podium, on the American flag snapping in the ocean breeze, on the 42 young men who were about to become part of the most elite special operations force in the world. My parents were near the front, exactly where I'd expected them. Third row, just off center. My mother wore the navy dress I'd seen her buy online 3 weeks ago. Charging it to a credit card she'd mentioned was nearly maxed out. She held 2 bouquets of yellow roses, wrapped in cellophane that crinkled when she moved. My father had on his gray suit, the one he wore to weddings and funerals, paired with a tie I'd given him for Christmas 5 years ago, that he'd probably forgotten came from me. They were talking to another couple, their voices animated, hands gesturing, making friends with strangers through shared pride in sons who'd achieved something remarkable. My mother saw me approaching and waved, her smile bright but distracted. "Kate, you made it! Good!" She kissed my cheek, barely making contact. her attention already swiveling back toward the podium. My father glanced at me, nodded, returned to scanning the area behind the stage where the SEAL candidates were assembling. "We saved you a seat." The seat was at the end of the row, a metal folding chair with a partial view blocked by a support column. The kind of spot you gave someone whose presence was required, but not particularly valued. I sat, crossed my ankles, placed my cover on my lap. The ribbons on my chest caught the light. National Defense Service Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, Navy and Marine Corps Overseas Service Ribbon, 2 Bronze Stars, Navy Distinguished Service Medal, 26 years of service compressed into colored fabric and metal. My mother leaned toward the woman beside her, Mrs. Janet Rodriguez, according to the name tag she wore. Her voice carried, not quite loud enough to be shouting, but certainly not attempting discretion. "This is what real service looks like. My son is going to be a warrior. He'll be out there in the field saving lives, not sitting in some air-conditioned office pushing paperwork." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded politely, but her eyes flickered toward me, taking in the uniform, the ribbons, the rank insignia. Her expression shifted into something uncomfortable, like she'd just witnessed a social misstep she couldn't politely address. I sat perfectly still, hands folded on my lap, face neutral. I'd spent 3 decades practicing this exact posture, this precise stillness, the art of being present while being invisible. My father half turned, saw me watching, offered an apologetic smile that wasn't actually apologetic. "Your mom means your work is important too. But James, he's gonna be out there actually fighting, boots on the ground, not just theory." I unscrewed the cap from my water bottle, took a sip. The water was cold, slightly metallic from the plastic. I could have responded, could have explained that logistics wasn't theory, that every bullet James would fire, every meal he would eat, every medical supply that might save his life in combat, had to move through supply chains I helped design and maintain. That boots on the ground were useless without the logistical infrastructure that kept them supplied. Instead, I screwed the cap back on, set the bottle carefully at my feet, turned my attention toward the podium where Lieutenant General Robert Hayes was approaching the microphone. The crowd quieted. 500 people settling into seats, shushing children, turning off phone ringers, the mechanical sounds of a ceremony beginning. The base commander spoke first. Captain Thomas Brennan, a SEAL himself, 28 years of service, his dress whites immaculate. His voice carried that particular cadence of someone who'd given this speech many times but still believed every word. He talked about sacrifice, about brotherhood, about the standards that made SEALs exceptional, about the 186 men who'd started buds with Class 350 and the 42 who remained. Then he introduced Lieutenant General Hayes. 3 silver stars gleamed on his shoulder boards. Hayes was 56, ramrod straight, with close-cropped gray hair and ribbons covering half his chest. Purple Heart, Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars, Navy Cross. A career built on decisions made under fire, on leading men in conditions that would break most people. I'd met him twice before. Once at a joint operations briefing in Tampa, where I'd presented logistics requirements for a SOCOM deployment. Once at a change of command ceremony in San Diego, where we'd exchange pleasantries at the reception afterward. Both times he'd been professional, sharp, the kind of officer who didn't waste words. His speech began with statistics, BUDS completion rates, the physical and mental demands, the global reach of naval special warfare, standard material delivered with authority. He was midway through a sentence about operational tempo when his eyes swept the crowd and landed on me. He stopped, literally stopped, speaking mid-word, his mouth still open, the sentence dying unfinished in the air between us. The crowd began to murmur, heads turned, trying to understand why a 3-star general had suddenly gone silent in the middle of a ceremony. Hayes looked at me, looked down at his notes, looked back at me. His expression shifted through surprise, recognition, understanding. He remembered. My parents looked confused. My father leaned toward my mother, whispering something I couldn't hear. My mother's face showed the particular bewilderment of someone watching a script deviate from expectations. Hayes stepped away from the microphone, spoke quietly to Captain Brennan beside him. Brennan's eyes found me in the crowd, widened fractionally, then he nodded. The murmuring grew louder. People were standing now, trying to see what had disrupted the ceremony. Someone's phone camera flashed. A child asked loudly why the man stopped talking. Hayes walked down from the podium, not toward his seat, not toward the SEAL candidates assembled in formation behind the stage, toward me. The crowd noise became a dull roar. Conversations, questions, the shuffle of people standing for a better view. My parents sat frozen, their faces blank with incomprehension. I stood, not because I was nervous, not because I was unprepared, but because protocol demanded it. When a 3-star general approaches a 1-star admiral, the junior officer stands. Hayes stopped 3 feet away, eye level, because I was tall and he wasn't exceptionally so. His right hand rose to his temple in a salute so precise it could have been used in a training manual. For exactly 2.7 seconds, the world stopped moving. The ocean didn't crash against the beach. The wind didn't rustle the flag. 500 people didn't breathe. Even the children went silent, sensing that something significant was happening even if they couldn't name it. I raised my hand in response, sharp, clean, held it for the regulation 3 seconds while our eyes stayed locked. Rear Admiral Morrison, it's an honor to have you here today, ma'am. His voice carried across the entire assembly area. Not shouting, just projected, the way officers learned to speak so troops could hear. General, around us, everyone was standing. Every officer in the crowd snapped to attention. Colonels, commanders, lieutenant commanders, captains. Even the junior officers, fresh-faced ensigns and lieutenants who probably didn't fully understand what they were witnessing. And behind the podium, in perfect formation, 42 SEAL candidates raised their hands in simultaneous salute toward me, including James. I caught his face in my peripheral vision. Eyes wide as dinner plates, mouth slightly open, hand moving up in the automatic response drilled into him through months of training. My parents remained seated. My mother's mouth hung open, the yellow roses forgotten on her lap. My father's hands were shaking, his camera half raised, forgotten midway to his face. Hayes held my eyes for another beat, nodded once, a gesture so small only I could see it. Then he turned and walked back to the podium. He lifted the microphone from its stand. His voice resonated across Coronado, across 500 witnesses, across 30 years of my silence. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the distinct honor of having Rear Admiral Catherine Morrison in attendance today. Admiral Morrison commands the Pacific Fleet Logistics and Operations Group, responsible for providing support to over 47,000 sailors across the Indo-Pacific region. The applause started immediately, not polite ceremony clapping, not the obligatory noise people made because it was expected. Real applause. Sustained, genuine. The kind that comes from understanding exactly what rank means, what it represents. She has served with extraordinary distinction for 26 years, including combat operations during the Gulf War, and classified missions I am not authorized to discuss, but which have earned her significant recognition for her service.
More applause. Someone whistled. A SEAL candidate in the back row shouted something that sounded like approval.
Admiral Morrison's presence here today honors these men and this ceremony. She represents the backbone of naval operations, the leadership that ensures our warriors have everything they need to complete their missions. We are privileged to have her with us. Hayes set the microphone back on the stand, gestured for everyone to sit. The crowd complied slowly, reluctantly, people still craning their necks to look at me. I lowered myself into the metal chair, posture unchanged, expression neutral. But something inside my chest was breaking open, not shattering. Opening, like a door that had been locked for 3 decades finally swinging wide. Beside me, my mother was crying. Not delicate tears, full crying, mascara running in black streaks down her face, her hands pressed against her mouth like she was trying to hold in sounds. My father looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. His face had gone pale, his eyes moving between me and the podium, trying to reconcile what he'd just heard with 3 decades of assumptions. The ceremony continued. SEAL tridents were presented. Each candidate walked to the podium, shook Hayes' hand, received the pin that marked them as part of the brotherhood. The crowd applauded each one, but the energy had shifted. Everyone was still processing what they'd witnessed. When James's name was called, he marched forward with perfect precision, shook Hayes' hand, received his trident. The photographer captured the moment. My brother, newly minted SEAL with a 3-star general against the California sky. My mother sobbed openly. My father's hands trembled so badly he could barely operate the camera. Half his photos would be blurred, unusable. I watched my brother achieve something real and felt genuinely proud. He'd earned this. Every brutal hour of training, every moment of doubt, every time he'd wanted to quit but didn't. This was his victory. But the looks on my parents' faces, the shock, the confusion, the dawning horror of understanding, that was mine. After the ceremony ended, families flooded toward their sailors. Hugs, photos, tears of joy. My parents moved toward James, but slowly, their steps uncertain, like they were walking through water. I stayed back. Let them have their moment. He deserved their pride, and despite everything, I wanted him to have it. Commander Chen appeared at my elbow. She'd flown in from Hawaii for a logistics conference and had come to the ceremony as a courtesy. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the smile she was suppressing. "Nice entrance, Admiral. I didn't plan it." "I know, that's what makes it perfect." She drifted away as my parents approached. James was with them, his new trident pinned to his chest, his face somewhere between pride and mortification. My father spoke first. His voice cracked on the second word. "Catherine, you're a Rear Admiral." "Yes." My mother reached for my arm, but I stepped back slightly. Not rudely, just enough. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I did. Several times. You didn't ask for details." James looked at our parents, then at me. His voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "I told you she was high-ranking. I said she was important. You said she worked in logistics." My father's protest came out weak, defeated. "I command logistics operations for the entire Pacific Fleet. It's a flag officer billet. I manage a budget of $4.2 billion and 2,300 personnel across 13 time zones." The numbers landed like physical blows. I watched them process, watched their faces reconstruct years of casual dismissals and forgotten milestones. "We didn't know." My mother's voice was barely audible. "You didn't ask." James cleared his throat, desperate to escape the tension. "I need to check in with my class. Kate, can we talk later?" "Of course, congratulations, James, you earned this." He squeezed my shoulder and fled. Smart man, leaving the three of us standing in the aftermath of 3 decades of willful blindness. The crowd flowed around us, happy families taking photos, laughing, celebrating. We stood like rocks in a stream, immobile while life continued. "We're sorry." My mother managed to get the words out. "I know. We should have." "Yes, you should have." I didn't soften the words, didn't offer comfort. They were adults. They'd made choices. Now they got to live with consequences. My father tried again, his lawyer instinct searching for an argument that might work. "We're proud of you. Are you? Or are you embarrassed that you didn't know?" "Both. Is that allowed?" The honesty surprised me. I'd expected denials, excuses, the usual family script. But my father looked genuinely shattered, like someone had pulled a fundamental belief out from under him. "What did we miss?" "Everything. You missed everything." My voice stayed level, professional, the tone I used in briefings when delivering information that would be difficult to hear. "I made lieutenant commander at 31. You asked if that was good. I made captain at 37 and sent you photos of my promotion ceremony. You texted back about James's wife being pregnant. I became a Rear Admiral at 45, one of the youngest flag officers in the Navy. You asked if that was higher than captain." My mother flinched with each statement, physical reactions to facts she couldn't deny. "I deployed to the South China Sea during heightened tensions in 2016, coordinated logistics for a carrier strike group during a crisis that could have escalated into armed conflict. 72 hours without sleep, making decisions that affected 5,000 sailors. The work I did was recognized, though I can't discuss the details publicly." My father's face was gray, now ashen. "I live in a penthouse at Waia Tower in Honolulu. 2,100 square feet, 34th floor, views of the Pacific. I paid $460,000 cash as a down payment. The total price was $2.3 million. I make $180,000 a year base salary, plus housing allowance, plus other benefits. My total compensation is approximately $220,000 annually." The numbers kept coming, each one another piece of a life they'd never bothered to learn about. "You've never asked where I live, what I earn, what I do with my money. You assumed I lived in base housing or some small apartment. You assumed I made enough to get by but nothing significant. You assumed wrong. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, pulled up a photo I'd taken last month specifically for this purpose. Though I hadn't known then exactly when I'd use it. This is my living room. I held out the phone. They both leaned in. The image showed floor-to-ceiling windows, the Honolulu skyline glittering at night, the ocean dark beyond, my furniture modern and expensive, artwork on the walls. This is my view every morning. I swiped to the next photo, the lanai at sunset, the sky orange and purple, diamond head visible in the distance. This is what I see when I drink my coffee. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father just stared, his eyes moving between the phone and my face like he was trying to reconcile them. You never invited us. His voice was barely a whisper. You never asked to visit. You never asked where I lived. You never asked anything about my life beyond whether I was still in the Navy. I put my phone away, adjusted my cover, checked the time on my Rolex Submariner, $12,000 of stainless steel and precision engineering. I have a flight back to Pearl at 1400 hours. I need to leave. Already? My mother's voice broke on the word. I took 3 days of leave to be here. Now I have 2,300 people waiting for me to get back to work. Can we see you off? No. The word came out flat. Final. But before I go, I need you to understand something. James's achievement today is real. Be proud of him. He deserves it. But don't ever again tell people that he's the only one in this family who serves for real. Don't ever again dismiss what I do as pushing paper. And don't ever again assume you know anything about my life when you've spent 30 years refusing to ask questions. I turned and walked away. My heels clicked against the concrete, sharp, precise sounds that matched my heartbeat. Behind me, I heard my mother crying. Heard my father trying to say something and failing to find words. I didn't look back. The drive to the airport took 25 minutes through Saturday traffic. I returned the BMW, checked in for my military transport flight, and sat in the terminal reading email on my phone. A supply issue in Guam. A personnel dispute in Yokosuka. The ordinary machinery of fleet operations that continued regardless of personal drama. Commander Chen found me before boarding. How are you feeling? The question was personal, which meant we were speaking as friends, not as commanding officer and executive officer. Tired, relieved, angry, take your pick. All of the above is allowed. She sat beside me, and we waited in companionable silence until they called my flight. On the C-130 back to Hickam, I sat in the jump seat and stared at the cargo netting without seeing it. The engines roared, making conversation impossible, which suited me fine. I thought about my parents standing in that parking lot, their faces destroyed by realization. Thought about James, caught between loyalty to me and love for them. Thought about 30 years of silence finally breaking in 5 minutes of public recognition. Thought about whether any of it mattered. 4 months later, James called at 2 a.m. I was awake, sitting on my lanai with a glass of wine, watching Honolulu glitter below. Kate, you awake? I am now. What's wrong? I need to talk. I'm not okay. Huh. I sat up straighter, adrenaline cutting through the wine haze. Are you hurt? Not physically. My knee's bothering me, but that's not... I'm struggling, Kate. With the pressure. With being a SEAL. With Mom and Dad. With Mom and Dad, they're doing to me what they did to you. Except opposite. They expect me to be perfect. Expect every mission to be heroic. Every training exercise to be a chance to prove I'm special. I'm exhausted. I don't know how to just be normal. His voice carried the particular rawness of someone who'd been holding it together for too long. Where are you right now? Outside the barracks. I couldn't breathe in there. Find somewhere private. I'll wait. I heard him moving, heard a door close, heard the echo of an enclosed space. Okay, I'm alone. Listen to me. Mom and Dad created 2 versions of the same problem. They made me invisible because I didn't fit their expectations. They're exhausting you because you fit them too perfectly. Both are toxic. So what do? You set boundaries. You tell them you love them but need them to love you as a human, not as a medal they can show off. You give yourself permission to fail, permission to be average, permission to be James, not James the SEAL prodigy. Easier said than done. I know, but if you don't, you'll burn out. You're 45 with maybe 15 to 20 years of operational life left. You want to spend it proving something to them, or do you want to live your life? Silence, then. Have they changed since Coronado? They're trying. They started therapy. They're seeing someone weekly, working through their failures as parents. They reached out to me, asked to visit. I said no, but I didn't close the door completely. Do you think you'll forgive them? I thought about that question, about forgiveness and reconciliation, and whether they were the same thing. I don't know, maybe eventually, but forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It doesn't mean letting them back into my life without boundaries. And it definitely doesn't mean making it easy for them. Fair enough. James, you're not responsible for their emotional needs. You're not required to be their source of pride or their proof that they were good parents. You're allowed to just be you, flawed, tired, uncertain you. Thanks, I needed to hear that. Anytime. And if you need professional help, I can recommend someone in San Diego, a therapist who specializes in military personnel. She's good with family dynamics. I'd like that. We talked for another 30 minutes about his training, his team, the weight of expectations. When we finally hung up, I sat on the lanai until sunrise, watching the sky change from black to navy to purple to orange. 6 months after Coronado, my parents showed up at Pearl Harbor. I was in my office reviewing procurement contracts when my secretary called. Admiral, you have visitors at the main gate. Your parents, they're requesting permission to see you. I hadn't spoken to them since the ceremony. They'd called dozens of times, left voicemails, sent emails. I'd responded to none of it. Now they were here, uninvited, demanding my time. Have them wait at the visitor center. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I finished the paragraph I was reading, closed the file, stood and adjusted my uniform in the small mirror behind my door. Walked to the visitor center with Commander Chen, who'd insisted on accompanying me. They were waiting in a small conference room. My mother looked older, thinner, her hair more gray than I remembered. My father's face had new lines, deep creases around his mouth and eyes. They stood when I entered. My mother's hands twisted together, nervous. My father's posture was uncharacteristically uncertain. Catherine, thank you for seeing us. You should have called first. I stayed standing, kept my voice professional, distant. You weren't taking our calls. There's a reason for that. My mother's eyes were already red, like she'd been crying in the car. We needed to see you, to talk, in person. You have 15 minutes. I have a briefing at 0800. We've been seeing a therapist, Dr. Rachel Morrison. She specializes in family dynamics. We've been going for 6 months. That's good. I didn't offer more, didn't make it easy. She's helped us see things from your perspective, how our behavior affected you, how we damaged our relationship. My father's voice was rough, like the words were physically difficult to produce. Understand. I kept my responses minimal, forcing them to work for every inch. We're not asking for forgiveness, not yet. We just wanted you to know we're working on ourselves, that we're serious about this. Noted. My mother stepped forward, and I resisted the urge to step back. And we wanted to tell you, we told James about the therapy sessions. We apologized to him, too, for putting too much pressure on him, for making him responsible for our pride. That was the right thing to do. He said you'd been helping him through training, that you were the one he turned to when things got hard. James is my brother. That's what siblings do. We should have been there for both of you. My father's voice carried genuine pain now. Yes, you should have. Silence filled the room. Commander Chen stood by the door, a silent witness. I need to go. I turned toward the exit. Wait, please. My mother's voice stopped me. Can we at least see photos? Can you tell us about your life? I considered refusing, considered walking out and never speaking to them again. But they'd come all the way to Hawaii. They were trying, however inadequately. I'll send you photos, and next time you want to visit, call first. 2 weeks notice minimum. Can we visit again? In 2 months, not before. And you stay at a hotel, you don't stay with me. Understood. My father nodded, accepting the boundaries because he had no choice. I left them there, walked back to my office through the morning sunshine, sat at my desk and stared at the harbor for 10 minutes before returning to work. Commander Chen appeared in my doorway. You okay, ma'am? I don't know, ask me in a year. Fair enough. They meant well, I think. Meaning well doesn't erase 30 years of damage. No. But maybe it's a start. Maybe. I turned back to my computer, pulled up the procurement contract, returned to the work that made sense, that had clear rules, that rewarded competence instead of birth order. 3 weeks later, I received a package at my office. Inside was a photo album my mother had made. Every photo of me in uniform she could find. My commissioning, my promotions, my change of command ceremonies. Photos I'd sent them over the years that they'd filed away and forgotten. Now they were mounted carefully, with captions in her handwriting. Each event described, each achievement noted. On the first page, she'd written, "To the daughter we should have celebrated from the beginning. We're sorry it took us so long to see you." I set the album on my shelf between my awards and decorations. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. And for now, that was enough. 14 months after Coronado, I received the call that would force me to make a choice about forgiveness. I was in my office reviewing fitness reports when Commander Chen knocked and entered without waiting, which meant the news was significant. Her face carried that particular expression of controlled excitement that comes with career milestones. "Admiral, you're on the list." "Which list?" "Promotion board, Vice Admiral. The official notification will come through channels, but I heard from a friend at Boopers. You're on the shortlist for '09. I set down my pen carefully, aligned it parallel to the edge of my desk. Vice Admiral meant 3 stars. Meant broader command, deeper responsibility, the kind of influence that shaped naval policy across the Pacific. "When does the board meet?" "Next month. Results probably 6 weeks after that." "Thank you for the heads up, Sandra." She lingered in the doorway, reading something in my posture. "You're gonna tell your parents, right?" I thought about that question. About whether I owed them advance notice of achievements they'd spent 30 years not caring about. "If I make the list, I'll tell them, after the ceremony. Not before? This one's mine. I don't want to share it with their opinions or their pride or their attempts to make up for lost time. I earned it without them. I want to celebrate it the same way." Chen nodded, understanding without judgment. "Understood, ma'am." The next 6 weeks passed in the usual rhythm of flag-level operations. A congressional delegation visited Pearl Harbor, requiring 3 days of preparation for 90 minutes of briefings. A typhoon delayed equipment deliveries to Okinawa, forcing me to authorize alternative sourcing that cost an additional $300,000 but kept 4 ships operational. A personnel crisis between 2 commands threatened to derail a joint exercise until I made phone calls that resulted in 2 commanders having very uncomfortable conversations with their superiors. I didn't think about the promotion board. Thinking about it wouldn't change the outcome. Then on a Tuesday morning in November, Vice Admiral Peters called personally. "Catherine, congratulations. You've been selected for promotion to Vice Admiral. The ceremony is scheduled for 8 weeks from now at Pearl. We'll send formal details through your command." His voice carried genuine warmth. Peters had been my mentor early in my career, one of the few senior officers who'd seen past my quiet demeanor to recognize competence. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity. You earned this. Your record is exemplary. The Pacific Fleet is lucky to have you." After we hung up, I sat at my window overlooking the harbor. Somewhere out there were the ships I'd helped provision, the sailors whose lives depended on supply chains I managed, the operations I'd coordinated that prevented conflicts from escalating. 30 years of service distilled into 3 stars. Commander Chen appeared with coffee and a knowing smile. "I heard. Congratulations, Admiral. Or should I start practicing Vice Admiral?" "Not yet. Ceremony's 8 weeks out." "How do you feel?" "Proud, exhausted, ready. Your parents will want to be there." "They can want. I'm not inviting them." Chen studied my face, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. "That's gonna hurt them." "I know. But some moments need to be ours alone. I don't want their guilt or their apologies or their sudden interest in my career. This promotion represents 30 years of work they never valued. I want to honor that work without them." "Fair enough." Over the next 8 weeks, I prepared methodically. My dress uniform was updated with 3-star insignia. My staff coordinated ceremony logistics. Invitations went to commands across the Pacific Fleet. Senior admirals confirmed attendance. The Pacific Fleet commander agreed to administer the oath. I told James 3 days after receiving notification. Made him swear to secrecy. "Kate, that's incredible. 3 stars, you're one of the most senior officers in the Navy. Don't tell Mom and Dad." Silence on the other end. Then, "You're serious?" "Completely. They'll find out after the ceremony, not before." "They're going to be devastated." "They'll survive. This is important to me, James. I need it to be on my terms." He understood. He'd been working with his own therapist for months now, processing the pressure of being the golden child, learning to separate our parents' expectations from his own self-worth. "Okay, I won't say anything. But Kate, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. 3 stars is extraordinary. Thank you, that means more than you know. After we hung up, I stood on my lanai watching the sunset paint Honolulu in shades of orange and gold. The city glittered below, 40,000 lights marking 40,000 lives, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: complete peace with my choices. The ceremony took place on a Friday morning in January. Perfect weather, 74 degrees, light wind from the northeast. Not a cloud visible from horizon to horizon. The kind of day that made people forget Pearl Harbor could be a place of war. The venue was the same pier where I'd been promoted to Rear Admiral 3 years earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Same location, higher rank, proof that competence compounds like interest. Pacific Fleet Commander Admiral James Richardson administered the oath. My staff stood in formation, crisp and professional. Other flag officers attended. 2 rear admirals, 3 commodores, commanding officers from across the Pacific. The audience included sailors from my command, representatives from allied nations, members of the Hawaii congressional delegation. My parents weren't there. I hadn't told them, hadn't sent an invitation, hadn't mentioned it during our brief, carefully controlled phone calls over the past months. When the 3-star shoulder boards were pinned on, when the crowd applauded, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not vindication, not revenge, just clarity. I'd reached this moment entirely through my own merit, without compromise, without needing validation from anyone except the institution I served. And that made it more meaningful than any ceremony they could have attended. After the official portion ended, there was a reception. Officers congratulated me, shook my hand, offered respect that had nothing to do with family or expectations. Commander Chen, now executive officer to a 3-star admiral, found me near the end. How does it feel? Right, it feels right. Your parents are going to be upset when they find out. I know, but some moments need to belong to us alone. She raised her glass of champagne. To Vice Admiral Morrison, may your next command be as successful as your last. We toasted, and I looked out over the harbor at the gray ships riding at anchor. My ships, my sailors, my responsibility. That evening, I called my parents. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness. Catherine, this is a lovely surprise. I have news. I was promoted last week to Vice Admiral. The silence lasted 5 seconds. Then, last week? Yes. My father's voice joined, and I knew she'd put me on speaker. You didn't tell us. No. Why not? The question carried genuine pain, which I recognized but didn't let sway me, because I needed that moment to be mine. Just mine, without your pride or your guilt or your attempts to make up for the past. I earned 3 stars through 30 years of work. You never understood what that work entailed. I wanted to celebrate the achievement without you. More silence. I could hear my mother crying softly, the particular sound of someone trying to hold it together and failing. That's more than fair. My father's voice was thick with emotion. That's more than we deserve. Can we at least see photos? Can you tell us about it? I'll send photos. And the next time you visit, I'll tell you about the ceremony. But you need to understand something. Your relationship with me is conditional now. It happens on my timeline, my terms. I'm not closing the door completely, but I'm also not making this easy. We understand. When can we visit? 2 months. Call 2 weeks ahead. Book a hotel. Don't expect to stay at my home until you've earned that privilege. Okay, we'll do that. After I hung up, I poured a glass of wine from the collection I'd built over the years. Sat on my lanai watching Honolulu transition from day to night. Thought about the path that had brought me here. From invisible daughter to 3-star admiral. From participation trophies to commanding 2,300 personnel. The next 2 months brought incremental healing. My parents called weekly, always asking permission first. They asked questions about my work. Real questions that showed they'd done research. My mother had notebooks filled with information about Pacific Fleet operations, naval rank structure, logistics management. My father read articles about carrier strike groups and supply chain operations. They were trying. It was awkward, often painful but genuine. In March, they visited Hawaii for the second time. I met them at a restaurant in Honolulu, neutral territory where neither of us had the advantage. This time, the conversation flowed more easily. Still careful, still bounded by the damage of 3 decades, but less jagged. My mother asked about my daily routine. My father wanted to know about the challenges of managing logistics across 13 time zones. They listened when I talked about my sailors, my responsibilities, the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives. It wasn't the relationship I'd wanted as a child. That was gone, broken beyond repair. But it might become something else, something honest, something less painful. Near the end of the meal, my mother pulled out her phone and showed me something she'd been working on. A digital scrapbook of my career, compiled from photos I'd sent over the years. Every promotion, every award, every milestone, organized chronologically with notes about what each achievement meant. I've been learning, trying to understand what I missed. You missed a lot. I know, but I'm trying to fill in the gaps now. Better late than never? Maybe. I wouldn't give her absolution. Wouldn't pretend that late effort erased early neglect. But I could acknowledge the attempt. My father cleared his throat, uncomfortable with emotion. We told our therapist about the promotion, about you not inviting us. She said it was healthy, said you were setting boundaries. She's right. It still hurt. Good. It should. You spent 30 years hurting me. Now you get to understand how that feels. The words were harsh, but my tone stayed level. Facts delivered without malice. My mother wiped her eyes with a napkin, mascara smudging despite her careful dabbing. We also told her about James, about how we're learning to let him be himself instead of our trophy. How's that going? Hard. We keep defaulting to old patterns, but we're working on it. James called me last week. He sounded better. He is better. He's in therapy too, working through the pressure we put on him. Good. We damaged both of you, didn't we? Just in different ways. Yes, you did. No point in softening the truth. They needed to hear it plainly. Can you forgive us eventually? I thought about that question, about forgiveness and reconciliation, and whether they were the same thing. I don't know, ask me in a year, or 5. Right now, I'm focused on building something new, not repairing something broken. That's fair. The rest of the meal passed in less fraught conversation. They asked about my penthouse, whether they might see it someday. I said maybe, but not yet. They asked about my work, and I gave them carefully edited summaries that avoided classified information. They asked about my plans for the future, and I told them I had at least 10 more years before retirement, possibly 15. When we parted, my mother hugged me carefully, like she was afraid I might break. My father shook my hand formally, then pulled me into an awkward embrace. We love you. We know we didn't show it properly, but we do. I know. And I did know. Love and respect weren't the same thing. Love and attention weren't the same thing. They'd always loved me, they'd just never valued me. Now they were learning the difference. 6 months after my promotion to Vice Admiral, I started a scholarship fund. The idea came from a conversation with Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a young logistics officer who joined my command fresh from the Naval Academy. She was brilliant, dedicated, and struggling with imposter syndrome because she was one of only 3 women in her training class. I'd called her into my office after reading her first quarterly evaluation, which was stellar despite her self-doubt. You're doing excellent work, Lieutenant. Thank you, ma'am. I just feel like I'm always playing catch-up, like everyone else belongs here more than I do. I recognize that voice. I'd heard it in my own head for years. Do you know how I made it to 3 stars? No, ma'am. By refusing to let anyone else define my worth. Not my parents, not my peers, not the officers who thought women didn't belong in operational commands. I defined my own value through my work. And eventually the institution recognized that. She nodded, taking notes like I was delivering tactical guidance. The Navy doesn't hand out stars for being likable or fitting in. It hands them out for competence, leadership, and results. If you can deliver those things, your gender becomes irrelevant. That's easier said than done. It is. But here's what helps. Financial independence. I started building wealth at 16, invested carefully, lived below my means. By the time I made lieutenant, I had more money saved than most commanders. That gave me freedom. Freedom to take risks in my career. Freedom to say no to things that didn't align with my values. Freedom to define success on my own terms. Her eyes widened slightly. I never thought about it that way. Most people don't. But economic power is real power. If you can support yourself independently, no one can control you through fear of poverty. After she left, I sat at my desk thinking about that conversation, about how many young women in the military struggled with the same doubts I'd had, about how financial literacy could change lives. I called my financial advisor the next day. I want to set up a scholarship fund. $500,000 initial investment. Target recipients: daughters of naval officers, particularly those pursuing careers in logistics, operations, or engineering. He asked questions about structure, tax implications, disbursement schedules. We worked out the details over 3 weeks. The Catherine Morrison Foundation for Naval Leadership launched in September. The first year, we awarded scholarships to 8 young women. The second year, 12. I insisted on personally interviewing every recipient, asking them about their goals, their challenges, their understanding of what it meant to build a career in a male-dominated field. One girl, 17 years old, daughter of a chief petty officer, asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Admiral, how do you deal with people who don't think you belong?" I thought about my parents, about 30 years of being invisible, about the silence I'd chosen, instead of constantly defending my right to exist in spaces that didn't welcome me. You build a table of your own. If they won't give you a seat at theirs, you build a bigger, better table and invite people who recognize your value. Eventually, they'll look over and realize they're sitting at the small table while you're hosting the feast. She wrote that down in a notebook, underlining it twice. The scholarship fund became my legacy in ways the stars on my shoulders never would. Every young woman who received funding, who graduated, who built careers in the Navy, was proof that visibility mattered, that representation changed lives, that the girl I'd been, invisible in her childhood bedroom, had grown into someone who could light the way for others. 3 years after Coronado, my parents came to Hawaii for the 6th time. By now, the visits had established a rhythm. They called 2 weeks in advance, stayed at the Hilton Hawaiian Village, met me for dinner at carefully selected restaurants that served good food without excessive intimacy. This time was different. This time, I invited them to my penthouse. They arrived at 1800 hours, dressed carefully, carrying a bottle of wine that cost more than they usually spent. My father's hands shook slightly as he handed it to me. "Thank you for letting us see your home." I poured the wine into crystal glasses I'd bought in Paris during a port visit years ago, led them onto the lanai, where the sunset was painting the sky in layers of purple and orange and gold. My mother stood at the railing, looking out over the city, the ocean beyond, the lights beginning to sparkle as darkness approached. "Catherine, this is beautiful. I worked hard for it. We can see that now." My father's voice was quiet, humbled. We sat in the teak chairs I'd imported from Indonesia, drank wine as the sky darkened and the city transformed into a constellation of electric lights. "How's therapy going?" My mother answered, and I could hear the work in her voice. "We're making progress. Dr. Morrison says we're confronting deep patterns. It's uncomfortable, but necessary." "How so?" "We're learning that we used James to fulfill our own needs, made him responsible for our sense of accomplishment, and we made you invisible because you reminded us of our failures." That's honest. It's devastating. My father's glass shook slightly, wine trembling against crystal. To realize we damaged both our children because we couldn't deal with our own inadequacies. Most people never realize that. I offered it as acknowledgement, not absolution. We're also working on accepting that you may never fully forgive us, that we might spend the rest of our lives trying to repair something we broke beyond fixing. That's realistic. Can you tell us what that would look like? Full forgiveness. I watched the lights of a cruise ship moving across the dark water, tiny and distant, heading towards some destination I couldn't see. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive, but I can build something new. A relationship based on honesty instead of history, respect instead of expectation, boundaries instead of blind family loyalty. We'll take that. Good, because that's all I'm offering. The rest of the evening passed in careful conversation. They asked about my work, and I told them about a recent crisis in the South China Sea, where logistics coordination had prevented a potential confrontation from escalating. They asked about my future plans, and I told them I was being considered for a position at the Pentagon, though nothing was certain. They asked about James, and I told them he was thriving, leading his SEAL team, dating someone seriously, building a life that belonged to him, not to their expectations. When they left, my mother hugged me tightly, longer than usual. "Thank you for giving us another chance." "I'm not giving you a chance. I'm building a new relationship. There's a difference." "We'll take it." After they left, I stood on the lanai for another hour, thought about the path from invisible daughter to 3-star admiral, from participation trophies to managing billions of dollars in naval assets, from silence to power. Thought about whether any of it mattered if the people who raised me still couldn't fully see me. Decided it mattered anyway. 5 years after Coronado, I sat in my office at Pearl Harbor reviewing deployment schedules when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number. "Catherine, I need to tell you something." Her voice carried a weight I recognized. "Bad news incoming." "What happened?" "Your father had a heart attack last night. He's stable now, but it was serious. They're keeping him at Scripps Memorial in San Diego for observation." "Is he going to be okay?" "The doctors think so, but it was a wake-up call. We're not getting younger." None of us are. I sat with the news, examining my feelings. Concern, yes, but not the panic that might have existed if we'd had a different relationship. Not the guilt that might have consumed me if I hadn't spent 5 years setting boundaries. "Do you want me to come?" The question surprised her. I could hear it in the pause. "Only if you want to, not out of obligation." "I'll check my schedule. See if I can get a few days." "Thank you." I flew to San Diego the next week. Found my father in a private room at Scripps, hooked to monitors that beeped with reassuring regularity. He looked smaller in the hospital bed, older, his face gray beneath the fluorescent lights. "Catherine, you came." I had leave time, not the most effusive greeting, but honest. "Your mother told you?" "Heart attack, moderate severity. They've got you on new medications. And a new diet. No more pot roast, apparently." He smiled weakly, and I saw the fear beneath the humor. Fear of mortality. Fear of running out of time to fix what he'd broken. "I'm sorry. For the heart attack? For everything. For not seeing you. For wasting 30 years being blind. For not being the father you deserved." I pulled a chair closer to his bed, sat down, looked at him directly. "I've spent 5 years deciding whether to forgive you. Whether rebuilding our relationship was worth the effort. Whether you'd actually changed or just felt guilty. And you've changed. Not enough, not completely, but genuinely. You're trying. That counts for something." "Does it count enough?" "I don't know yet, but I'm here. That's more than I would have done 5 years ago." He reached for my hand. I let him take it, though the gesture still felt foreign. "I'm proud of you. I know I said it before, but I need you to hear it again. What you've accomplished, the leader you've become, the lives you've touched. I'm proud. And I'm sorry I didn't say it when it mattered. It matters now, just not the same way." "I understand." We sat in silence for a while. The monitors beeped, nurses walked past in the hallway. The ordinary machinery of hospitals continued around us. Eventually, my mother arrived with coffee and the news that the doctors were pleased with his progress. We talked about his treatment plan, his recovery timeline, the lifestyle changes required. Before I left, my father asked one more question. "Will you tell me about your work? Really tell me? Not the sanitized version, but what it's actually like?" I thought about that request, about whether he'd earned the right to know. Decided he had. I told him about the weight of commanding thousands of sailors, about the 3 a.m. phone calls when something went wrong, about the decisions that affected billions of dollars and thousands of lives, about the satisfaction of solving impossible logistics problems, about the loneliness of flag rank, about the pride of knowing I'd earned every star through competence, not connections. He listened without interrupting, asked intelligent questions, took notes on a pad the nurses had left beside his bed. When I finished, he was crying, quiet tears that he didn't try to hide. "I missed all of that. Missed knowing this person you became." "Yes, you did. Can I make up for it?" "No, but you can build something new. That's all any of us can do." I flew back to Hawaii the next day, returned to my office, my command, the work that defined me more completely than family ever had. But something had shifted. Some final piece of anger had loosened in my chest, creating space for something else. Not forgiveness exactly, not reconciliation in the traditional sense, but possibility. The chance that relationships could evolve, that people could change, that late effort, while it couldn't erase early damage, could create new foundations. I am Vice Admiral Catherine Morrison, United States Navy. I command operations that span the Pacific, manage resources worth billions, lead sailors who trust my judgment with their lives and careers. I earned 3 stars through 30 years of discipline, competence, and refusing to be invisible even when the people who raised me chose not to look. My parents spent 30 years missing my achievements. They spent the last 5 trying to understand what they'd overlooked. That effort doesn't erase the damage, doesn't give me back the childhood I needed, doesn't repair the relationship we could have had. But it's something, it's honest, it's real. And after 3 decades of silence, honesty feels like enough. Your worth doesn't require anyone's permission. Not your parents, not your siblings, not anyone. Build your own table. Create your own success. Define your own value. And when they finally look up and realize what they've been missing, you'll already be too far ahead to need their validation. That's not bitterness, that's freedom. The stars on my shoulders confirm what I already knew. I was never the problem. I was always enough. They were just looking the wrong direction. Now they see. And while that brings satisfaction, the real victory was becoming someone I respect, someone I'm proud to be, someone who doesn't need their recognition to know her worth. That's what it means to finally be visible, on your own terms in your own time, with or without their applause.